Sometimes, it's the smallest things, like a worn-out teddy bear, can carry the heaviest memories and heal the deepest wounds. The city was almost asleep when Emily left the small diner where she worked. The night air was cold, and a soft drizzle covered the streets. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders, wishing she could afford a warmer one. It had been another long day of serving customers, smiling through tiredness and pretending not to notice the aching in her feet. The glowing streetlights reflected off the wet pavement as she hurried to catch the last bus home. Missing it would mean a 2-hour walk in the dark. She wasn't ready for that. When the bus finally arrived, it groaned to a stop, the doors opening with a hiss. Emily climbed on, shaking the rain from her hair. The driver, an older man with kind eyes and a quiet face, gave her a small nod. His name tag read Robert, but everyone just called him Mr. Rob. She had ridden his bus so many nights that they didn't need words anymore. She smiled politely, and he smiled back before turning his attention to the empty road. The bus was nearly empty as usual. The seats were old and smelled faintly of cleaning spray and dust. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the soft patter of rain against the windows. Emily took her usual seat near the middle, close enough to feel safe, but far enough not to disturb the driver. She placed her small bag on her lap and sighed deeply. It was finally over. Another day, another shift, another handful of coins toward her rent. Robert watched her in the mirror for a moment. She looked no older than 25, her face pale from exhaustion, yet her eyes still carried a quiet strength. He admired that. Life hadn't been kind to him either, and maybe that's why he felt a silent connection with her. Two lonely people passing through the night together, each with their own battles. As the bus rolled down the wet streets, Robert's thoughts began to drift. The rhythm of the windshield wipers reminded him of nights long ago, when he used to drive home after bedtime stories. His daughter Lily had loved sitting by the window, hugging her teddy bear, and watching the rain race down the glass. He used to tell her the raindrops were little angels sliding down to visit Earth. She would giggle and believe every word. But Lily was gone now. 3 years had passed since the accident, and yet sometimes it still felt like yesterday. The house had become too quiet, the laughter replaced by silence. He had taken the night shift, not because he needed the money, but because he couldn't bear to be home. The bus was his escape, a moving place where memories couldn't follow too closely. Emily didn't know his story, but she sensed the sadness behind his calm manner. Some nights, when the bus was completely empty, he would glance out the window with that faraway look, as if seeing someone who wasn't there. She had once considered asking if he was okay, but decided against it. Everyone had their pain, she thought. Some just carried it more quietly. The bus passed by dark buildings, a few blinking signs, and the occasional stray cat darting through the rain. Emily leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes for a moment. Her apartment wasn't much, a single room with peeling paint and a flickering light, but it was home. Her dream was simple, to save enough to study nursing someday. But right now, survival came first. Halfway through the route, Robert hummed softly to himself. It was an old tune, one Lily used to sing. The sound filled the empty bus, and for a second, it felt like time paused. Emily opened her eyes and listened quietly. There was something strangely comforting about the sound. Warm, familiar, almost like a father humming a lullaby. It made her think of her own childhood, long before life had become so heavy. The rain grew heavier outside. The city lights blurred behind streaks of water on the glass, turning everything into moving colors. Emily pulled out her phone to check the time, almost midnight. Just one more stop, she thought. Her eyelids grew heavier, the bus rocking gently like a cradle. The warmth of the heater made her feel drowsy. Robert glanced at her again and smiled faintly. She reminded him of Lily, not in looks, but in the innocence of someone still fighting for her future. He wished he could tell her not to give up, that pain eventually softens, that even broken hearts can still love again. But he stayed silent. Words, he had learned, could be heavy when not asked for. When the bus stopped at a red light, Robert looked out at the wet road. His reflection stared back at him, gray hair, tired eyes, and a lifetime of what-ifs. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The world outside was dark, But inside the bus, there was a strange calm, almost peaceful. As the bus started moving again, a small sound broke the quiet. It came from the back, a faint clatter, like something falling off a seat. Robert turned his head but didn't see anyone. The last passenger had gotten off 2 stops ago, and only Emily remained, half asleep. He made a note to check after she left. Probably just a bottle rolling around or something a passenger had dropped earlier. Emily stirred when the bus turned into her street. She straightened up and rubbed her eyes, embarrassed that she had almost fallen asleep. Robert noticed and chuckled softly. "Long day?" he asked. She smiled weakly. "Like always. Get some rest when you get home," he said kindly. "I'll try," she replied, stepping off the bus and waving before disappearing into the rain. Robert watched until she was gone, then parked the bus at the last stop. The night was quiet again, the rain easing into a drizzle. He turned off the engine and stood up, stretching his stiff back. When he walked toward the back seats to do his final check, he saw something that made him pause. A small stuffed bear lying face down on the seat near the window. He frowned and picked it up. The fur was old, the color faded to a dull brown, and one paw had a tiny tear. For a second he couldn't breathe. His heart started to pound. That little rip, he remembered stitching it himself once upon a time, using thread that didn't quite match. His eyes widened as he turned it over. The pink ribbon around its neck, the small stain on its ear, it was exactly the same. The same teddy bear his daughter had carried everywhere. His fingers shook as he held it closer, the familiar smell of old fabric hitting him like a wave. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. "It can't be." He sank into the nearest seat, staring at the bear as tears filled his eyes. He had buried it with her. He remembered clearly it had been in her arms when the small white coffin was lowered into the ground. So how was it here now on his bus, after all these years? The silence around him felt different now, heavier, like the world was holding its breath. He clutched the teddy bear against his chest, and for the first time in a long time, Robert let himself cry. The rain outside seemed to cry with him, sliding down the windows in long silver lines. The night that began like any other had just turned into something he could never explain. The next night, the city looked just as quiet. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still shiny and wet under the streetlights. Emily waited at the bus stop, yawning. She was even more tired than usual. But something about last night had stayed with her, that strange, heavy feeling when she saw the driver holding the small teddy bear. She had noticed his face when he found it. It wasn't just surprise. It was heartbreak. She wanted to ask what was wrong. But he had looked too lost in his thoughts. When the bus arrived, she stepped in with a small smile. "Evening, Mr. Robb." He nodded gently. "Evening, Emily." His voice was softer than usual, almost hollow. The teddy bear was no longer in sight, but she could tell he hadn't forgotten it. The look in his eyes said everything. The bus started moving, its wheels splashing through shallow puddles. Emily sat in her usual seat again, pulling her sweater closer. For a few stops, everything was normal. The hum of the engine, streetlights flashing by, the occasional sound of raindrops falling from power lines onto the roof. But soon, the peace was broken. At the next stop, a man ran toward the bus, waving. Robert hit the brakes just in time, and the man climbed aboard, dripping wet and breathing hard. He looked like he'd been running for a while. His jacket was torn, and a small duffel bag hung from his shoulder. "Thanks, man," he said quickly, flashing a nervous smile as he dropped a few coins into the fare box. "Almost missed it." Robert nodded but kept watching him through the mirror. Something about the man felt off, the way his eyes darted from window to window, as if checking whether someone was following him. Emily noticed it too. She glanced up from her phone, her body tensing slightly. The man chose a seat near the back, resting his bag beside him. His leg bounced restlessly, and his fingers tapped the window. Emily tried to ignore it, but her mind started spinning with possibilities. Maybe he was just anxious, or having a bad night, she thought. Still, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that crept up her spine. Robert kept his focus on the road. Though his thoughts were divided, he couldn't stop thinking about the teddy bear from last night. It was now in a plastic bag in the lost and found box at the depot, but something about it wouldn't leave him alone. It was exactly like Lily's. He had even checked the stitches, the same uneven ones he'd made years ago when fixing her toy. It made no sense. After a few stops, the man at the back shifted in his seat and looked out the window again. His reflection in the glass showed tired eyes, maybe scared. When the bus slowed for another stop, he suddenly stood up. "This is me," he said quickly, even though the stop was in a quiet area with barely any lights. Before Robert could reply, the man grabbed his duffel bag, or so it seemed, and hurried out into the night. The doors closed behind him with a soft hiss, and the bus rolled forward again. Emily turned slightly and frowned. "Weird," she murmured to herself. She looked toward the back seat and froze. The duffel bag was still there. Mr. Rob?" she called softly. "Yes," he asked, glancing up in the mirror. That man, he left his bag. Robert slowed the bus and stopped by the curb. He turned in his seat to look. There it was, a small, dark bag, resting where the man had been sitting. "Probably forgot it," he muttered, but his stomach tightened. Something about this didn't feel right. He stood up and walked slowly toward the back of the bus. Emily followed carefully, curiosity pushing aside her tiredness. Robert reached for the bag, hesitated for a second, then unzipped it halfway. Inside were a few clothes, a small notebook, and something soft and brown peeking from underneath. When he pulled it out, his breath caught in his throat. Emily covered her mouth in surprise. It was the same teddy bear. The same pink ribbon, the same worn-out paw with the little tear, the same faded brown fur. For a few seconds, the world seemed to stop. The hum of the engine disappeared, the city outside went silent, and only the sound of Robert's uneven breathing filled the air. His fingers trembled as he turned the bear over, his eyes darting across every familiar mark. The tiny stain on the ear, the stitching that didn't quite match it, was identical in every way. "That's the same one, isn't it?" Emily whispered. Robert nodded slowly, his voice breaking. "It's impossible." He sat down on the seat, clutching the bear tightly in his hands. Emily stood nearby, watching him in silence. His face was pale, his eyes glossy with tears. "It belonged to my daughter," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "Lily, she died 3 years ago. This bear was buried with her." Emily's eyes widened. "Buried? But then how? I don't know," he said, shaking his head, his voice filled with confusion and fear. "I don't understand how it's here. How could it be here?" He looked around the bus, as if the walls themselves might give him an answer. Emily sat beside him carefully, her voice gentle. "Maybe it just looks like hers," she offered, though even she didn't sound convinced. "No," Robert said firmly. "Look." He turned the bear over and opened a small cloth tag under its arm. The faded ink still showed a child's handwriting. The letters were messy, but the word was clear. Lily. Emily's breath caught. The rain had started again outside, tapping lightly against the window like a whisper. "Oh my God," she murmured. Robert leaned back in the seat, staring at the bear. His eyes were wet, but he didn't wipe the tears. They just fell slowly, one after another. "I buried her with this," he said softly. "I remember holding it before they closed the casket. My wife insisted we let her keep it." His voice cracked. "I said goodbye to it. I said goodbye to her." Emily didn't know what to say. She looked at him, then at the bear, then back at him again. The air inside the bus felt heavy, like it was filled with invisible memories. She could almost picture a little girl smiling and hugging the bear tightly. Sitting right where they were now, Robert finally stood up, his hands still clutching the toy. "I have to know," he said, more to himself than to Emily. "That man, the one who left this behind. Who was he? Why did he have it?" Emily nodded slowly. "We could ask the bus company. Maybe they have security cameras, right?" Robert blinked, realizing she was right. Yes, maybe. They record every shift. He put the bear gently back in the duffel bag and zipped it up. For the rest of the drive, neither of them spoke much. The bus hummed quietly down the dark streets. carrying them through the night that suddenly felt deeper than before when they reached the depot. Robert locked the bus and carried the duffel bag as if it were made of glass. Emily watched him, feeling an ache in her chest. He looked like a man holding his past, fragile, haunting, and precious all at once. Before leaving, she turned to him. "Mr. Robb," she said softly, "maybe it means something. Maybe this isn't just a coincidence." He looked at her, tired but grateful. "Maybe," he whispered. "Or maybe it's my daughter's way of reaching out." That night, long after Emily went home, Robert sat alone in the driver's seat of the parked bus, the teddy bear resting on his lap. The depot was silent, and the rain outside had stopped again. He ran his thumb over the small stitched paw and whispered, "Lily, if this is really you, show me what to do." The bear stared back at him, silent and soft, and for a moment he thought he could almost feel the warmth of his little girl's tiny hands holding his again. The next morning, Robert woke up early, even though he had hardly slept. His mind was still spinning from the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the teddy bear, the same one that had once belonged to his daughter. It sat on the small table beside his bed now, and the sight of it made his heart ache. He had checked it again and again during the night, hoping he was wrong. But there was no mistake. The tag still had Lily's name written in her tiny, uneven handwriting. It was hers. There was no other explanation that made sense. That terrified him. He sat there in silence for a long time, staring at the bear. "How did you come back?" he whispered, his voice barely a sound. "Why now?" The house around him was quiet, too quiet. Every corner reminded him of what he had lost. Lily's old drawings still hung on the fridge. A pink cup with faded cartoon prints still sat in the cupboard. His wife had left soon after the accident, unable to bear the silence. He couldn't blame her. Grief had swallowed them both, just in different ways. By the time evening came, Robert was back on the bus, his uniform neatly pressed, but his eyes tired and distant. Emily climbed aboard with her usual smile, though she looked worried when she saw him. He seemed older today, like the weight of something invisible was pressing down on his shoulders. "Are you okay?" she asked gently as she took her seat. He hesitated, then nodded. "Just didn't sleep much? Because of the teddy bear?" she asked quietly. Robert gave her a sad smile. "Yeah, because of that." He didn't seem angry or frightened now, just confused and deeply sad. The bus rolled through the streets again, and Emily watched the world blur past the window. She thought about what he had told her the night before about Lily, about the bear being buried with her. It still didn't make sense, but she could feel how real it was for him. The pain in his eyes couldn't be faked. When the bus reached a quiet stop, Robert pulled the small bag from under his seat. He had brought it with him again. "I keep thinking I imagined it," he said softly, opening it. The teddy bear was inside, sitting upright as if waiting for him. The pink ribbon was slightly frayed, and one paw still had that little tear. Emily leaned forward, her eyes fixed on it. "It really does look old," she said in a low voice. "Like it's been through a lot." "It has," Robert whispered. "I remember every mark. That stain on the ear? Milkshake. She dropped it at a fair when she was 6. She cried for an hour because she thought it was ruined. I told her the bear just wanted to try some milkshake too." Emily smiled faintly, but her eyes were sad. "She must have loved it a lot." "She did," Robert said, his voice cracking. "She used to sleep with it every night. Even when she got sick, she wouldn't let it go." He paused, staring at the bear again. "And then, the day of the funeral. I remember tucking it under her arm myself. I told her it would keep her company wherever she was going." He swallowed hard. "I never thought I'd see it again." Emily didn't know what to say. She wanted to comfort him, but what words could help something like that? Instead, she asked quietly, "Do you think it's really hers?" Robert didn't answer right away. He turned the bear around and pointed to the tag inside its arm. "That's her handwriting. I taught her to write her name when she was 5. She used to write it on everything she owned. Even our cat's food bowl had Lily written on it once." Emily looked closely. The writing was faint, but it was there. Shaky, uneven, written in a child's hand. It was too specific to be a coincidence. Robert took a shaky breath and leaned back in his seat. "I can't stop thinking about that man who left the bag," he said finally. "Why did he have it? How did he get it? It's like someone gave it back to me on purpose." Emily nodded slowly. "Maybe we can find him. I'm going to try," Robert said. "I already asked the depot about the security footage. They said they'll review it. Maybe we'll see his face clearly." The bus continued on, and the rest of the night passed quietly. But Robert's mind wouldn't settle. Every sound made him flinch. Every movement in the dark corners of the bus made him turn his head. He kept expecting to hear Lily's laugh again, that sweet, small giggle that used to fill the house. Later that night, when Emily got off at her stop, she hesitated before leaving. "Mr. Robb," she said softly, "maybe this isn't something bad. Maybe it's a sign like she's trying to tell you she's okay." Robert gave her a tired smile. "Maybe," he said. "But why now, after all this time?" "Maybe because you needed it now," Emily said simply, then waved and disappeared into the quiet street. Robert drove on alone, the teddy bear still sitting beside him. The bus hummed softly through the night. The street lights flickered against the glass, and the reflection of the little bear stared back at him. It almost looked alive, peaceful, watching. When he reached the end of his route, he parked the bus and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deep and almost heavy. He sat there for a long time, looking at the bear. He thought about the years he had spent hiding from his memories, pretending to be fine. Maybe this was his daughter's way of making him face them again. Maybe the bear wasn't a mystery to solve, but a message. Still, one question wouldn't leave his mind. How did it get here? He took the bear home again that night. Before going to bed, he placed it on Lily's old dresser, beside a framed photo of her smiling with missing teeth and bright eyes. The picture had been taken on her 7th birthday. She was holding the same teddy bear, wearing a paper crown, and laughing at something her father had said. Robert touched the photo gently. "You're still taking care of me, aren't you, kiddo?" he whispered. His voice broke as he said it. In the middle of the night, he woke suddenly to the faint sound of something falling. His heart raced as he turned on the light. The bear had fallen off the dresser and was lying face down on the floor. For a moment, fear froze him in place. Then he picked it up slowly. A small, folded piece of paper had slipped out from behind the bear's back. Tucked under the ribbon, his hand shook as he unfolded it. It was an old receipt from a thrift store dated nearly 3 years ago. The writing was faded, but one word stood out clearly: donation. Robert stared at it, realization dawning. His wife must have donated the bear after the funeral. She had cleared out Lily's room while he was at work, saying she couldn't stand to see the toys anymore. He had never asked where they went, so that's how it got out into the world. But how it had found its way back to him, that part still felt impossible. It was as if the bear had taken a long journey through strangers' hands, only to return home at the exact moment he needed it most. He sat down on the edge of the bed, holding the bear against his chest. The fear slowly faded, replaced by something softer, something like peace. Maybe Lily hadn't been lost completely. Maybe love, in its quiet way, had found a path back to him. Outside, the night was calm. The rain had stopped, and the sky was clear. Through the window, Robert could see a single bright star. He smiled faintly. "Good night, sweetheart," he whispered. "I miss you." And for the first time in 3 years, when he closed his eyes, he slept without dreams, just a quiet feeling that somehow his little girl was still with him. Robert could not stop thinking about the teddy bear. Every time he tried to focus on something else, the memory of holding it last night returned with sharp clarity. He had tried to convince himself it was a coincidence, but he knew deep down it was more than that. The bear had a history, a story, and he had to find out how it had ended up on the bus. The questions kept swirling in his mind. Who had left it? Where had it been all these years? And why had it come back to him now? Early the next morning, Robert returned to the bus depot. The duffel bag containing the teddy bear clutched tightly in his hands. The other drivers were still getting ready for their shifts, exchanging quick greetings and checking their buses. Emily was not there yet, but Robert didn't care about anyone else. He went straight to the Lost and Found office, hoping someone there could help him uncover the mystery. "Good morning," he said to the attendant behind the desk. "I need to see the security footage from last night." The attendant nodded slowly. "Sure, but it can take a little time. Do you know the exact time the bus was on the route?" Robert handed over the schedule and explained when the last passenger had gotten on. "There's a man who left a bag on the bus," he said quietly. "I need to know who he is and where he went." The attendant led him to a small office with a large monitor. Robert's hands were trembling slightly as the footage started to play. There it was, the bus arriving at the last stop, lights flickering on the wet streets. Emily had already boarded. And then the man ran toward the bus, slightly out of breath, and climbed aboard. Carrying his duffel bag, Robert leaned closer, studying the footage. The man looked nervous, constantly glancing around. He sat near the back, placing the bag beside him. The bus moved slowly through the streets, and then, at one quiet stop, the man hurried off, leaving the bag behind. The footage was grainy, but Robert could clearly see the small brown teddy bear peeking out from under the flap of the bag. "That's him," Robert whispered, his voice almost breaking. "That's the man who had the bear." The attendant paused the footage and turned to Robert. "Do you want me to see if we can get his identity?" "Yes," Robert said immediately. "I need to know who he is and why he had it." For the next several days, Robert and Emily worked together, tracing the route and asking around at bus stops and small shops along the way. Emily even went online, checking social media and local community groups. The more they investigated, the clearer it became that the man had been careful. He had kept a low profile, leaving almost no traces. But their determination didn't waver. Finally, after 2 days of searching, they got a lead. The bus company contacted Robert with information from one of the security cameras at a transfer station. The man's face was caught more clearly, and he had been identified as Mark, a young father who lived in the city. Robert felt a mix of anxiety and hope. He didn't know what to expect when he found Mark, but he knew he had to confront him and find answers. Robert and Emily tracked down Mark's address. He lived in a small, modest apartment on the edge of the city. Robert's heart pounded as they approached the door. He knocked gently, uncertain how Mark would react. After a few moments, the door opened, revealing a man with tired eyes and an apologetic smile. "Hi," Robert said quietly. "Are you Mark?" "Yes," the man replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" Robert held up the duffel bag with the teddy bear inside. "I found this on the bus last night. It belongs to my daughter, Lily, who passed away 3 years ago. Can you tell me how you got it?" Mark's face went pale, and he stepped back to let them in. "Please, come in," he said softly. It's a long story." Inside the apartment, Mark explained everything. A few years ago, he had been at a small thrift store downtown, looking for something to comfort his young daughter, Sophie, who had been very sick. He wanted to find a toy that would make her smile, something soft and familiar. The owner of the thrift store had given him the brown teddy bear. He didn't know it had belonged to anyone else. Robert's hands clenched slightly, and his throat tightened. "But how did it get from my daughter's home to that store?" he asked. Mark shook his head. "I don't know. The store owner said it came from a donation box. That's all they could tell me. I had no idea it belonged to someone else. I only bought it to comfort Sophie." Robert felt his heart ache, but he also felt something else, relief. The bear hadn't been lost or abandoned. It had been on a journey, helping another child who needed it, just like Lily had once needed it. The idea that his daughter's toy had been part of someone else's life, even for a short time, gave him a strange sense of comfort. Emily watched silently as Robert processed the information. She could see the pain in his eyes, but also a small glimmer of hope. Somehow, the bear had returned to him at the right moment. Almost as if it had been guided back. Mark handed the bear back to Robert carefully. "I'm sorry if this caused you pain," he said quietly. "I would have returned it sooner if I had known." Robert shook his head. "No," he said softly. "You didn't cause pain? You gave it to my daughter's memory in the best way possible. You helped another child feel safe." Mark nodded, and for the first time, the tension in his face softened. "Sophie loves this bear," he said. "It helped her through some really hard nights." "I didn't realize it had such a story." Robert smiled faintly. "It's funny," he said. I buried this bear with my daughter, thinking it would stay with her forever. And now, it's returned to me. Maybe it was meant to come back. Maybe Lily wanted someone else to be comforted, and then for me to have it again when I needed it. Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. She had been drawn into the story from the very beginning. But seeing Robert's mixture of grief, relief, and hope was almost too much to bear. She reached out and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Sometimes love has a way of coming back," she whispered. For the first time in a long while, Robert laughed softly, a sound that carried both sorrow and joy. "Maybe you're right," he said. "Maybe Lily's still looking out for me in her own way." They talked for a while longer, sharing memories of children, toys, and small moments that had meant the world to them. Robert realized that the journey of the teddy bear had connected them all in a way he had never expected. It wasn't just a toy. It was a bridge between families, between grief and comfort, between the past and the present. By the time Robert left Mark's apartment, the bear safely tucked back into his duffel bag, he felt lighter. The weight of unanswered questions had lifted a little. He knew there were still mysteries he might never fully understand. But he also knew that Lily's memory was alive, not just in his heart, but in the small acts of love that continued to travel through the world. As he walked back to the bus depot with Emily beside him, the city lights reflected in puddles on the streets, giving everything a golden glow. Robert realized that sometimes the hardest moments lead to the most meaningful discoveries. The bear had returned for a reason, and he was ready to embrace whatever that meant. That night, when he drove the bus once again, he looked at the teddy bear sitting quietly beside him. It felt like a small piece of Lily's spirit was there, watching over him, reminding him that even in the darkest nights, hope could find its way home. For the first time in years, Robert felt a strange sense of peace. He knew the road ahead would still be filled with grief, but now it also held love, connection, and the knowledge that some things, some memories, some toys, some hearts, never truly leave us. They find their way back when we need them the most. After the visit to Mark's apartment, Robert felt a strange mix of emotions. He was still grieving, still missing Lily terribly, but he also felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. The teddy bear once lost was back in his hands, and he now understood that it had been helping another child in need before finding its way home. The thought that Lily's little toy had brought comfort to Sophie somehow made him feel closer to his daughter again. The next morning, Robert woke early, carrying the bear carefully in his arms. He didn't want to put it down, afraid that if he did, it might disappear again. He remembered all the nights he had spent reading bedtime stories to Lily, holding her tiny hands and tucking her in tightly. Now he held the bear as if it carried a piece of her spirit. It was soft, worn, and familiar, more than a toy. It was a reminder of love, memory, and connection. That evening he returned to the bus, bringing the bear with him as he always did now. Emily noticed immediately and gave him a small, understanding smile. She didn't need to ask questions. She already knew how much this little toy meant to him. The bus moved smoothly through the quiet streets, the engine's hum comforting in the night air. The city seemed calm, peaceful, like it was finally giving Robert a moment of stillness he had not known for years. As the bus approached the final stop on the route, Robert thought about Sophie. Mark had told him about her bravery, her smiles despite her illness, and how the teddy bear had helped her through the hardest nights. That made Robert realize something important. Lily's memory was not trapped in sadness. It had traveled, in a sense, to another child, providing comfort and hope. Even though he had thought the bear was gone forever, it had continued to fulfill its purpose. And now it had returned to him when he reached the depot that night. Robert decided to take a detour before heading home. He wanted to see Sophie in person. Mark had agreed, understanding that Robert needed to meet the little girl whose life had briefly intertwined with his daughter's memory. When he arrived at Mark's apartment, Sophie's small face lit up with curiosity. She was holding a soft blanket, her eyes bright despite the challenges she faced with her illness. "Hi, Sophie," Robert said gently, kneeling to her level. I wanted to thank you for taking care of my daughter's bear." Sophie tilted her head, thinking. My mommy says it helps me sleep at night, she said softly. It's like it's hugging me when you're not there. Robert smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. Yes, it's very special, and it means even more to me now, because it came back to me. To remind me of Lily, he showed her the bear carefully. Sophie's eyes widened, but instead of reaching for it, she nodded solemnly. Maybe Lily wanted me to have it for a little while, she whispered. Robert's heart ached and healed at the same time. He realized that love didn't end when someone passed away. It moved in ways that were quiet and gentle, appearing in moments of comfort, in unexpected returns, and in connections that crossed time and space. Maybe you're right, he said softly. Maybe Lily wanted you to feel safe, and now she's helping me too. Mark watched quietly from the background, understanding the depth of what was happening. The two fathers shared a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the journey this little bear had taken. It had been more than a toy. It had become a bridge between two families, between grief and hope. Between past pain and present comfort, Robert stayed for a while. Sharing stories about Lily, he talked about her favorite games, the silly things she had done, and the way she had hugged the teddy bear so tightly that the ribbon had frayed. Sophie listened intently, her small hands clutching her blanket. Even in her young age, she seemed to understand the weight of memories and the importance of love that could travel from one life to another. Before leaving, Robert handed the bear to Sophie gently. I think it belongs with you for now, he said, but it will always have a piece of my daughter inside it, and someday it might find its way back to me again. That's okay, it means love is still moving. Sophie's eyes sparkled. I'll take good care of it, she promised. She hugged the bear tightly, and Robert saw the same comfort he had once given Lily reflected in her expression. He knew that the bear's journey wasn't over. It was only part of a larger story about love, loss, and healing. As Robert left the apartment and walked back to the bus depot with Emily, he felt lighter than he had in years. The city lights reflected off the wet streets, giving everything a golden glow. For the first time in a long while, the weight of grief did not feel suffocating. Instead, it felt like a thread connecting him to something bigger than himself, to the memory of his daughter, to the lives she had touched even after passing. That night, when he drove the bus, the streets were quiet and the air was cool. He imagined Lily sitting quietly, smiling at him from somewhere he could not see. Emily rode with him, noticing the calmness in his expression, the peace in his eyes. She knew he was no longer just carrying memories of grief. He was carrying hope, love, and the realization that connections never truly end. When he parked the bus at the end of his route, Robert sat for a while, reflecting on everything that had happened. The teddy bear had traveled through strangers' hands, bringing comfort and joy to someone else before returning to him. It was as if Lily's spirit had guided it, ensuring that love reached where it was needed most. He realized that grief, though painful, could also guide people to unexpected moments of healing as he walked home that night. Robert carried with him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He thought about the small ways love continued to move through the world, quietly connecting people, bridging gaps, and offering comfort. The journey of the teddy bear had reminded him that memories never really leave, and the people we love continue to influence lives, even in ways we cannot predict. Back at his apartment, Robert placed a small photo of Lily beside her favorite chair and sat quietly for a few minutes. He whispered her name softly, tears in his eyes but a smile on his face. Thank you, Lily, he said, for everything, for coming back to me, for helping another little girl, and for reminding me that love never really leaves. That night, as he finally went to sleep, Robert felt a quiet joy. The city outside was peaceful, the night sky clear, and somewhere in the universe, he imagined Lily's little smile shining down on him. He knew that life would continue to have its hardships, but he also knew that love, in its purest form, always finds a way. And in that knowledge, Robert finally felt whole again. Holding on to the warmth of memories, the promise of hope, and the gentle reminder that some connections are never truly lost.